In this learning module, we're going to see how the four elements come together to make the world fun and interesting. Let's look at how they show up in the various places in our lives. Once you understand how this foursome code works in our lives, you'll see them everywhere, this code, this fire, air, water, and earth code. Let's start by seeing how the four elements have always been front and center in our lives. As children, we have adventures in them, don't we? Think back about your days as a kid spending time outside, or even now as you hike, fish, swim, and ski. We like to feel the warmth of the sun, nature's fire element, as we lie at the beach, and the soft playfulness of water as we swim, the earthy terrain of a trail as we hike, those refreshing blue skies of cool air as well. Notice how we all talk about the weather. We relate to the four elements every day as they continuously come together in the weather. We're all living a four element lifestyle to some degree right now as we engage nature's four elements each day in the weather. Just getting outside every day can inspire adventure as you feel the power of one or more of them playing out in the life of the outside world. As a temperate zone person living in Syracuse right now, I can't help but believe that people in the temperate zone may feel nature's and indeed the cosmos' energies in special ways. We get the cool, crisp air of autumn that helps us to feel that energetic, buoyant vigor of air. When the sun shines on a cold day, you can especially feel the power of the fire element, nature's sun. At that moment, it's not hard to imagine that you're in touch with a positive spiritual force as those photons of energy emitted from our sun warm your skin. We are all meant, I believe, to be four element shamans of sorts. This is because we are meant to feel these forces through our engagement with the four elements in the weather each day, or as we have our adventures, our field games, our walking, running, and fishing moments. And the walking technique you're going to learn from me later will help you to draw these four elements in even more powerfully as you walk. Let's see how these four show up in sports. Clearly, most sports enter our lives as we find ways to have fun and be active in the world outside. While there are many sporting activities that are inside, there's nothing like an outdoor field or a basketball court when the weather is just right. Again, it's the interaction of the sun, the breezy air, the moist green of life around you that all come together as you play. As in all things, it's interesting to see how these foursomes show up in sports themselves. Here's one way of seeing it. Fire is the essence, the overall look or the oneness of the game. The air element are all those opposing yin-yang principles that work in the game, the catching, the throwing, for example. Water is the way that these principles come together to create the rules of the game, the underlying balance and structure of the game. Earth, it shows up as a physical action, and great players convey an artfulness that relates to their elegant way of doing things that ultimately means they're drawing all these four principles in exceptionally balanced ways. The character, the style, the skill set of each player, which makes certain players interesting or endearing to us, expresses that player's artful way of balancing these four principles. There are various ways that the foursome come together in art itself. Let's take a look at scrapbooking, something most of us can at least relate to. There's one way of seeing it. The fire element relates to the essence or the wholeness of the experience, the moment, the time of one's life that's being expressed. The air element relates to the interesting aspect of the story, the cleverness, so to speak, of how this fits with that. It's the interesting logic of the storyboard. The water element speaks to the feelings that your collection of images brings forth, the emotions, the momentary joys, the sentiments that are being memorialized. And lastly, the earth element, it speaks to the particulars, the physical reality that the images are recalling. We could go further into any picture within a scrapbook or any art form for that matter and pick out another foursome. The fire element, shining visual wholeness, the air of opposing principles of light and darkness, stark and dense, the near and far within a picture. Water, it shows up as various colors, the polar principles that come together in some kind of a balance that bring an emotional energy as well. And then earth as the physical components building a scrapbook page, a canvas, a sculpture. It's worth mentioning that art is a water element dimension of our lives because it relates to the balancing principle in general, to balancing things in beautiful, engaging, interesting, artful ways. Remember, the productive balancing and interconnecting of parts is exactly what water is all about. When this balancing act is done well, it is good art. There are multiple art forms where this balancing act might be noticed. Music is an especially powerful art form, and it's because music propels us to move. The water element is stirred into motion. And let's look at the Beatles. The Beatles are possibly the most important musical group over the last 50 years or so. I suggest that the reason the Beatles were so esteemed, so well liked in popular culture back then is because the four elements moved so well through them. Let's have some interesting fun and look at them in that way. There was the complement of their four ways of thinking, singing, playing, their instruments, their four physiques, their faces, their four personalities and lifestyles. What made them especially good was that while they may have been all reasonably balanced with each of these four principles, each one was exceptionally strong in one of the four elements. While others may see it differently, for me, George was the one who drew upon the fire principle the most. His focus on India's spiritual sitar music and the consistent spiritual focus in his life exemplified fire. John was the most intellectually curious and politically engaging one, and so he would be of the air principle dominant Beatle. Paul played with Waters' more frivolous, cute, romantic version of reality. The girls especially liked what Paul offered them. And then we have Ringo, the drummer, who could not help but draw upon the power of earth. Drums emphasize that earth as per the lower, more physical vibrations that are percussed into existence as you're physically engaging by hand, stick, or even the foot pedal. In some sense, all successful musical groups are composed of bandmates that complement each other in this energetic kind of way. Let's look at literature. It's another art form of sorts, isn't it? While it doesn't have the somatic, watery energy of music, it does so by balancing the four elements in its own way. The four elements of literature might be seen in this kind of way. Fire, it speaks to the overall essence or theme of the book. It's whatness, so to speak. Air relates to how people are dealing with particular principles that show up in the issues and conflicts that they are facing, generating much of the plot line. Water, it relates to the emotional drama, the inner angst, the frustrations and joys as the issues are resolved. Earth speaks to the physical action and deeds, the deeds that are done by the characters which ultimately carry the story. Along these same lines, we have the four main categories of books that you can think of as inspiration. They would be the fire elements. Knowledge-based books draw upon the intellectual powers of air. Drama, fantasy, romance, sex, and thrillers, they make up the watery side of literature. And as a book with physical action draws a lot of the earth into it. A good book often combines all four. Even within the sentence structure of literature and our speech, these same four holistically show up. There is the subjective noun of fire, as in I or you or a chair, as in the chair fell. Air is the verb presenting itself as something happening through some muscle-driven action or other naturally generated motion of action, whereas he said, she jumped, or the chair fell. Water brings into motion or into words the descriptive way that something was done, the energy of it, often the emotion sadly, profusely, beautifully. These are the adverbs of language. Adjectives are also of this watery bent. They are the terms that often convey a descriptive way that the noun is working. For example, the snow was cold but beautiful, or the old house is pale yellow and run down. So let's do a quick summary of how we use this statement, I went for a walk. I is the fire element. Walk is the air of muscular action. There is no water in the sentence, and indeed drawing water into the sentence would flesh out more of what was actually happening, adding an emotion or energetic quality, as in I went for a walk because I was sad, or I went for a brisk walk. If there was consistently a lack of this emotional energy of water in someone or some piece of literature, we might say they were flat or it was dry. Earth is a literary element that relates more to the passive object that is generally present as opposed to the more active fire element. This is, think of the fire, the sun as it shines is more active to the passive earth. The earth is the object, the passive in their statement that is not even spelled out. Still, it's in that sentence as in, I went for a walk here in this physical place where I am. Of course, that earth element could be more defined as well. I went for a walk in the woods or on my treadmill. In all cases, the object of the sentence, the more passive noun, is that sense's earth element. Let's move from art and literature to another important part of our collective lives, politics. We've seen that while we each have our own way of creating balance in the many ways of our parts of our life, together we participate in creating a group politic as the collective balances are meted out in one's country, state, or town. Though we have our two-party system in America, there are in a way four parties. And here we're going to consider how each of them relates to the four elements. We'll begin with earth. Keep in mind that earth is always about maintaining a strong inside against an outside forces, those proverbial barbarians at the gate. The need for security is a primitive and primal need that we each have, which is why we have those cavemen. Earth continues to motivate us to do things that help us feel physically secure. Being so basic a need, we all have some of this desire for a politics that provides some military strength, national security. This pull toward the national security part of things finds a home in today's Republican Party. Their cries for a strong defense carry a lot of emotional power, drawing at least a little bit of everyone to them. It's that you can never be too safe and secure way of thinking that motivates people to that. Another set of the populace is focused on those olden, time-honored values, often with the goal of nourishing and protecting children. These water-oriented people tend to be more religious and conservative, and they often bristle at the idea of a secular national government promoting ideas that go against their traditional values. They tend to have a set of black and white moral codes, and they want laws against things that they see as detrimental to family values. Those tradition-focused people find solace in the Conservative Party. People in America's South and the rural parts of most other states are particularly attracted to politicians who have this water nature to their platform. Do not like people from the cities and educated elites from Washington, who they often feel are imposing their secular, humanistic, liberal values onto them. Opposing this conservative water element way of thinking is the liberality of air. Air element focused people are into the elbow room that seeks personal liberty and freedom. While older people tend toward water's conservative way of thinking, young people are often more aligned to this freedom focus of air. Along these lines, it's useful to sense that America was destined to be this place on the planet where the air element would take off in a big way. Previously in Europe, the old world, and today in much of Middle East and Central Europe, Central Asia, the water element's ethnic bloodlines, tribes, and traditions work to keep people and things just as they are. America began as a new world filled with the expanse of the open, area-ended frontiers. These ideas are enshrined in our Constitution as well. This open space was tailor-made for this liberal concept of freedom. And lastly, we have those who are focused on the fire's sense of unifying oneness to our nation. They, with this way of thinking among them, strong in them, feel that the demographic and socioeconomic parts of the greater whole should be treated fairly and equitably. They would be the Democrats of today. The way they generally seek to do this is through legislation, through laws that gain progress toward what they see as a noble goal. They often champion the little guy against the moneyed business class, seeking taxes and regulations to even things out. Labor unions, a traditional part of the Democratic Party, seek to take this abstract notion of oneness or unity into the physical places where people work. In a sense, the Democratic Party is aligned to our nation's motto, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Indeed, our founding fathers were idealists. They planted our nation very much into the realm of the fire principle and its ideals. While there may be a spiritual sensibility to some people as they relate to this oneness context in the realm of politics, the Democrats typically frame this oneness in secular terms as the wholeness of a nation built upon the equality of its citizens. America works so well, and the framers continue to be seen in esteemed ways because the Constitution was created after much debate about how to balance these principles of life within the political framework. Well, that's it for now. I hope you got a sense of how this myriad of foursomes play out in our lives. May they always be strong within you, these four elements. And I look forward to helping you with these modules as they come in the future. Bye-bye.